After reviewing Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma on Switch 1 last week, I was really keen to see what types of improvements the Switch 2 version upgrade would offer. There's also a standalone edition, so we're going to look at the performance, the visuals in docked and handheld, frame rates to see if it's actually worth the upgrade, as well as going over the mouse mode implementation and, of course, updating the scores where necessary, and if indeed it is an upgrade at all. Remember, we're giving away a Nintendo Switch 2 over the coming weeks. We've been watching and enjoying the comments you guys have been leaving, and we will be announcing that in a community post. You don't have to do anything special at all. Alright, Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma Switch 2. Is it worth it? Well, let's find out. If we begin then by looking back at the Switch 1 version, it becomes evident very quickly the issues I had with the game. Now, on the one hand, performance tried to stick around 30 frames per second. Sadly, during heavy combat instances, this came tumbling down and created some control issues. As well as this, the resolution was slightly lower, which meant that the edges of every object in the world had stepping. It basically looked low res and had jaggy edges with very little anti-aliasing. Now, I did mention that I enjoyed the artistic direction, and certainly it was able to hide some of the worst offending visual issues, but it was still very noticeable, particularly after the amount of time I'd spent with the game. There were certain areas, like when you fly your dragon, where performance certainly took a bit of a hit, and there were a few other areas where it also impacted the visuals. For example, we saw animation culling. That's where distant animations are cut down in frame rate to preserve performance, and there were a number of visual anomalies as well that would take place, little glitches in environmental geometry. However, load times were actually okay. So then we jump over to the Switch 2 edition, and the keen-eyed amongst you will instantly see that 60 frames per second silky frame rate. Frame rate analysis shows that it is targeting 60, and I was surprised by how low the frame time was. Back in the Switch 1 era, we were lucky to see around 30 to 40 milliseconds for the frame time, but here we've got between, I think it was 10 and 20. That gives you an instant feedback feeling, very responsive and very low controller input latency. The 60 frames per second isn't perfect. There are a few times, such as in combat, where you will see some minor fluctuations. It may drop down to 51, 52 before climbing back up again. Outside of combat, when you're plowing the fields or moving around the environments, it does maintain 60 almost all of the time. Jumping over to handheld play with the Switch 2, this is also the case. A few very minor drops here and there, but generally 60 all the time. It means all of the animations look better. The character models have also seen a big bump in resolution, and you can just feel this is the way the game was intended to be played. I did notice a big knock-on effect on combat. Having that increased frame rate just makes combat easier as you aim to keep track of all of the on-screen monsters. Texture resolution hasn't had quite the bump I thought it would have. As I say, those character models look great and the animations that go along with them, but some of the textures are still a little low res, perhaps as an artistic choice, but worth mentioning. Aliasing is significantly improved. There's much less jaggy edges, obviously with the much increased visual resolution. Visuals and performance, they score 18 out of 20. The story is set in the land of Azuma, where you take on the role of the Earth Dancer. You get to name your character and choose between two different archetypes, and that's about it. Now, an Earth Dancer is what's known as a spiritual warrior, but you're not entirely sure exactly who or what you are because, yes, that old trope returns, the classic amnesiac protagonist. Thankfully though, it doesn't dwell too heavily on that, and instead uses it as an excuse for you to guide the character in a direction that you choose, or at least in terms of the relationships that you forge. Now, Azuma is plagued by dark forces, and it manifests in what's known as the Blight. This appears in various forms, and as another area I'm basically sure I've seen in about 3 different games, one of them being Zelda. So the premise is quite straightforward. The Blight's bad, you're good, get rid of it. This also extends to the villagers themselves. They can get blighted and turned into the various monsters that you'll have to forcibly purify throughout your adventure. Straight off the bat, It's a fun game. There's numerous different areas to unlock. You'll learn about your past, the future, and I won't spoil the narrative, but there is something glorious in gameplay you need to stick around for. So that gameplay then, it begins in a familiar fashion. You become the new village chief. It's the village of spring, and as such, it's locked into the spring season. With that said, you can still progress the days by sleeping with different events on certain days. Although there's not a great deal, there's quite a few birthdays, and there's the occasional larger festival like the fireworks, but Guardians of Azuma is anything but plain. In fact, it moves along at quite a fast pace, very unusual for this type of experience. Part of that is actually down to the clever idea of tying the seasons to the island. We'll go into that a bit more later. So your village has an overall rank. To improve it, you'll have to cultivate the land. But as an earth dancer, you do that in a slightly unorthodox way. You'll unlock a series of techniques, and you're assisted by your trusty companion, Warby. Now, there's a lot more to him than meets the eye. Again, I won't spoil that. But as you gather resources from the world, such as mining, chopping at trees, or killing monsters, Warby can then use these ingredients to create two different soil types, and when combined, they then create farm tiles. Might sound a little bit convoluted, and it is a little bit, but it's pretty basic and makes sense when you get into the game. You can then place down farming areas which can be farmed. You can till the land, plant seeds, water the ground, and you can use those earth dancer abilities to once a day increase the speed at which the crops grow. Now, I'm going to have to split this review into chunks or it's just going to be too massive. Let's start with village management and the simulation side. So as the village chief, it's not just down to you to decide exactly where everything goes and spend your whole life just watering and planting, thank goodness. Finally, we have a life sim that seems to fully respect your time. How does that look, Mark? Well, you're the village chief. You can tell the villagers to do it for you. Not only that, but they have this very cool mechanic that feels like it's straight out of Theme Hospital, i.e. each villager has their own characteristics. Do you remember back in the day, you used to recruit the doctor? He was very cheap, but he used to go around the back of the building and well, he wasn't the best in other ways. Rune Factory's done something similar. Each villager has their own characteristics, both positive and negative. They have their affinities. One might like chopping trees, while another prefers to spend their days in a shop. So you assign them different roles. This massively cuts down on the amount of legwork that you have to do, and it means your focus shifts from what you have to do every day to what you want to do. It's quite subtle because there's a certain flow to these games, isn't there? And you find yourself doing certain things almost automatically. But as your village grows and you put new buildings down, more house space, then new villagers will join it and that village will level up, unlocking you new materials, new buildings, and man, have they got that village management side dialed. It just feels great. Throw into that direct management. So when you go into your field, it takes on like a grid-based view. And it's from your standard perspective. Quite slow going, place down the field, water the ground, you know the drill. And you can pick buildings and structures up and rotate them. But then if you click the right stick in, it switches to a top-down view and everything's sped up. In fact, a top tip for things like removing ground items, you can just hold the button down and drag the cursor along and do that significantly quicker. Now, I did try this in handheld mode and sadly there's no touchscreen, but the controls actually work surprisingly well here, especially if you stick to the D-pad. So in some regards, the farming is simplified but satisfying. At the end of each day, you can place items into the box, pretty standard, but I will say making money here is easy. Things sell for high prices, you make a ton of cash, and realistically, money management isn't an issue. For some, it may even be too easy to get money. You can also just go down to a shop and sell things, and I sold something like 300 turnips and made something like 25k in one day without even realizing I'd actually farmed those up so quickly. You can typically bring a crop to fruition within a day or two. Next up within the village then, I think we should talk about romance. There are many romanceable characters. This has also been given some quite interesting mechanics around it. So for example, if you decide to start chatting away more regularly to one person than the others, you'll start to unlock bond actions. Now, if you choose wisely, you'll gradually win them over and your bond level will increase. As this happens, you'll unlock specific bond quests, I'm not allowed to show you those because it's quite spoilery, but they're really quite amusing. But more than just those quests, as you reach certain levels, it allows you to form parties of those characters you've built an affinity with. You can change their equipment, their weapons, you can upgrade their gear, and they'll fight for you. So then managing your town, it's quite fluid. It just flows quickly. And there's quests everywhere. Mrs. Groggins, she wants you to go collect 67 turnips. Old Bob the woodcutter, of course he wants his wood, like it's standard in that regard. But as I say, it's quick, so you don't feel like you're just grinding away to do those things. Here's the kicker though. You've got that village that you're the chief of, but it's one of many. In fact, shortly after you've got to grips with that, you'll be visiting another one and another one. You get the picture. What's very cool is you can fast travel anywhere. There are loads of little shrines all over the place, and you can just go into your menu and just fast travel. If you're in a dungeon and you want to go back home, you can be there in about 5 seconds flat. If you were working in one of your farms, and they're all seasonal, again, I'm trying to keep spoilers to a minimum, but you get the idea. You can just jump back and forward between them. And I think that's a great time to look at the combat. Now, this is an action RPG with sim life elements, maybe a 50-50 split. Marvelous have worked hard to improve the combat mechanics, and it's to varying degrees of success. Now, one big win is that you can actually use multiple different weapon types, from short swords, long swords, dual blades. You can pull a bow out and manually aim it, although I do wish there was gyro, and you can lock onto enemies by clicking the right stick in. It feels like a reasonably well-designed action RPG in that regard. There are sections where you're locked into an area and you have to defeat all the enemies before you can progress. And there's a dodge mechanic ripped straight out of The Legend of Zelda, the new games, whereby if you time it at just the right moment, the whole world slows down and you can wail on the enemies. It feels good, but it doesn't feel great. The reason it's not great is because the enemy AI is just not there. Sometimes it will run into a wall, at other times it just won't do anything, but generally it just drones its way towards you. With the lock on, it's pretty easy to circle strafe your way behind and out of any possible danger. And larger enemies will have a stagger gauge. Fill that up and they stagger and you can start to perform even more devastating moves. Aside from standard weapons, throughout the game you unlock these unique ones that have magic moves tied to them. They're quality, they look great, but a little bit like the currency system and how easy it is to make money, the same can be said for the combat. You are so powerful that I would actually recommend playing this one on the hardest difficulty setting. There are 3 options, easy, medium, and hard. I played most of the game on medium, and by the end I was just turning it up because I wanted that little bit more of a challenge. In keeping with the rest of the game, you level up rapidly. As you level up, you've got access to skill trees. Well, they're coming out of your ears. You've got skill trees for each of your weapons. There are skill trees for your farming, for your everyday skills, for your romance trees. Now, I like the fact that each weapon had its own skill tree because it uses clever XP allocation. So if you use your sword a lot, then you'll get specific sword experience, but then you also get a pool of general experience from every activity you do in the game, and you can spend that wherever you want. It's a very good idea in practice. It means you're never without some XP coming in, even if you're just heavily focusing on one area of the game, so you don't feel like you're missing out. It's actually very well designed in a lot of different areas. It's just a little bit janky. There are lots of different boss fights. They don't avoid the same issues as the main enemies in the game, so their AI isn't great. They have a few interesting attack patterns, but they're pretty easy to take down. And I like the fact that you can actually refight bosses just for experience. The final area of Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma is the exploration and adventure. Now I'm going to say that cool thing that I said from the start, and that is you get to fly a dragon. This is literally the dragon out of the Neverending Story, and I am here for it. I mean, it's not literally that dragon, but you know what I mean. You can manually control it, fly between these different islands, and it's here where you can find a lot of those unique and hidden ingredients, and it's so cool. I did not expect it to happen, and it took me by surprise, and yeah, I enjoyed that a lot. Now, one key and very important detail that I haven't spoken about are the limits. Now, in these experiences, you usually have a stamina system, or if you stay up too late, you get tired and have to go to bed. Well, we got a mixture here. The primary limiting factor is time. And by that, I mean time of day. So when you hit a certain late hour, you'll literally just start to drain health and you'll have to teleport back to bed and have a quick snooze. What you don't have is a constant stamina limit. So if you want to hit those rocks till the cows come home, well, you can. There's what called RP, I think they're rune points, and they can be replenished with food and things, but time management is quite forgiving, which seems to be the theme of the game. The last area to talk about specific to the Nintendo Switch 2 is the excellent implementation of mouse mode. Now, so many people said it was something they would never use, but it works surprisingly well just on the sofa next to you, and it enables you when you're farming in your fields to click the left stick in and it will shift over to mouse mode, and it feels so much more natural and fast to quickly remove foliage or pieces of pathway and trees and debris and then scroll through the inventory before placing a few seeds. You can then flick your hand back to the normal position and it knows you're no longer using that mode and you carry on playing. It really does work well and it enhances the experience. With the improvements they've made to controls and the much smoother frame rates, gameplay definitely is affected. The gameplay scores 18 out of 20, the controls go up to 17 out of 20. Now, the value initially took a bit of a hit on the Switch 1 version because of the performance. However, it is a little more expensive on the Switch 2, so that score is going to remain the same at 17 out of 20. Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, with the full Switch 2 treatment, is just a more enjoyable game. The silky frame rates, the integration of mouse mode for those who want to use it, and the improvements those areas make to things like the combat, well, the score is increased. The previous on Switch 1 was 80%, on Switch 2 it gets a SwitchUp score of 87%. Thanks to all of you, we won't be doing all of our reviews like this, it's just the only way realistically that we could do it because the Switch 1 version was already out. Hopefully this has been of some use to you, gives you all the information that you need, and as always, just a big thanks to our Patreons and our members. If you want to be in the running for that Switch 2, just keep watching the channel, keep commenting, and we'll announce the winner in the coming weeks. Alright, for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!